had a nearly identical story happen to one that I heard on your channel, and felt it was important to relay my experience as well. There were many times in my life where I was staying in very unusual and creative places. From about the age of 22 to 24, I was living in a few different tents I had set up in the South Hills of San Jose, California. I stayed there for months at a time by myself because I enjoyed the freedom to do what I want and stay where I wanted. Within the amount of time, I had countless experiences with wildlife. I was camped too close to a water source. I basically set up camp right in the middle of Mother Nature's freeway. Almost every night, around midnight, a group of wild pigs would run down the hill. Some of them were enormous, and sometimes they would squeal and scream. When you were out there, and they were sniffing around the paper-thin tent, it was something terrifying. I also would hear deer, coyote, and have been stalked by a mountain lion at least 3 times. You will learn the natural sounds at night surprisingly fast, especially if you are in the same area for a long time. There was one night when I was sleeping, and was awoken by the sound of pigs coming down the hill. But this time something was different. I'm a very light sleeper, and even though I was somewhat used to them, they would scare me when they got within 15 feet from my tent. But this time, I remember feeling relaxed. It was an unusual relaxed, though, because these things were closer than I was normally comfortable with them being. And surprisingly, the more relaxed I was feeling, the more tired I got. It almost felt like I was being put under before surgery, except I was still aware and had my senses. I heard what sounded like a pig sniffing, and felt one of them brush up against the tent, and then they seemed to leave. All except for one, that is. I couldn't tell if this one was in the back of the group or separate and following not far behind the rest. In my sedated state, I was not concerned the way I normally would be. Then, the pig, or whatever it was, did something bizarre. It laid on me. I could feel its body heat and feel its breathing, but I dare not move, or perhaps I couldn't move from the fear. This creature laid on my chest for what felt like multiple hours, but probably was not much more than just a few minutes. I felt to get off my chest at some point in time, and shortly after that the sedation wore off and I woke up. I don't know what to make of it, but someone out there in a past episode shared a similar experience on your channel, and perhaps others have too. If anyone knows what this may have been, please enlighten me in the comments down below. This isn't a scary story about myself, but from my mother. My mother has been working for a grocery store that is well known. It's called Save Mart. This is one of the times that I've been scared for my mother. Back sometime in 2019, my mother was taking some of the old boxes from the meat department out to the trash. This meant she needed to bring them right out back behind the store. So her being the hard-working and best employee at the store, she does as needed. But the only problem was that when she was going out to the dumpster, she sees this homeless man. Now, inherently homeless people aren't bad, and that's not what we're trying to push here. Usually, my mom would just tell them that they couldn't be there and they had to leave. But when she looked at this man, she noticed something blood-chilling. He was smiling, but not just a normal, "Hello miss, how are you doing today" smile. It was the "watch me go crazy and hurt someone" type of smile. Right after noticing his creepy smile, she notices this shiny object in his hand. You guessed it, it was a knife. In my mother's words, she said, "Oh hell no," and booked it back into the store. She didn't have enough time to close the big back door behind her because of how heavy it was, so she immediately ran to her coworker. His name is Tom, so she immediately ran to Tom and said, "Hey, some homeless guy's out there with a knife." Right as he finished saying this, guess who comes through the doorway with that same smile and knife in hand? You guessed it, the random homeless man. They both noticed him immediately, and Tom began grabbing this big butcher's knife off the table, and the homeless man can see that. He knows that his cheap blade is nothing, and books it out. But that isn't the end of my mom's new friend. Who else but our friend the homeless man charges into the store trying to stab some of the workers, and people luckily get the man and throw him to the ground. Luckily, he didn't hurt anyone that we knew of. He took off soon after. They did call the police, but since he was homeless and not in the store, they couldn't really do anything except watch the building to make sure he didn't come back. I love my mom. Man, I hope she doesn't have to go through anything like that again. And I know how bad our small city has gotten. It's all too possible that that guy could have been drugged out or something, and that might have been my last day with her. So every time I hug my mom, I make sure to squeeze her a little bit harder, because you never know when a random person will strike. Yes, this story may not sound true, but I promise you it is. I'm sorry that the grammar might not be amazing, but thank you for sharing it if you do. My city has a large homeless population, so this is probably a very normal thing for my mom, but she is okay. If you want to see what I mean, or if you live around Merced, California, you know what Save Mart I'm talking about, and you know our homeless population. But to all the workers out there, stay safe. And to everybody who's homeless and not doing crazy things, please be safe as well. I know it's a dangerous lifestyle. About 2 years ago, a couple of friends and I decided to sneak into an abandoned asylum in Downey, California after nightfall. We noticed a security guard doing his final rounds and waited for him to leave the premises. Once the coast was clear, we approached the surrounding fence and jumped over it to get onto the property. And as soon as we did, we all experienced something that I can only describe as a heavy and unpleasant feeling. All the windows and doors were boarded up from the outside, but as we made our way around the building, we discovered an entrance that had been broken into. So we made our way in and ended up in the auditorium. There were medical records scattered all over the floor of every room. One of my friends picked up one of them that caught his attention. It was a file from 1889. I don't recall the name of the patient, but he was said to have had some sort of mental disability, like what we now refer to as Down syndrome. It also had a list of mental disabilities and random treatments that had been performed on him over the years, ranging from shock treatment, inducing vomiting, to being forced to consume mercury pills. As we continued to explore the halls, we felt like we were being watched. It got to the point to where we weren't comfortable being inside the building anymore. As we made our way back outside, I heard a faint whisper and what felt like a hand brush on the back of my head. I quickly looked back, but there was nothing there. We ran from out of there as fast as we could, jumped the fence, and made our way back to the car, and thought nothing of it. We were just relieved to be out of there. The following night is when things really took a turn for the worst. I went to bed at around 9 p.m. and awoke sometime around 12:25 a.m. to the feeling of someone tugging on my leg. I have a tendency to fall asleep with the TV on, so when my dad gets home from work around midnight, he does a routine check to make sure my TV is off. So I wake up thinking I'm going to get lectured about leaving the TV on again. But as I look toward the doorway, I see that the door is open and the hallway light is on, but there is no sign of my dad. I then begin to feel a pressure on my leg again, so I quickly turn my attention to the foot of my bed, and that's when I saw it. A solid, black faceless silhouette is crouched over me and has a firm grip on my leg. I immediately froze and was unable to move, and everything went silent. All I could hear was what I can only describe as static as it starts making its way up to my face. I immediately started to pray, and within seconds its grip on me became weaker, and I was able to bang my fist on the wall to try to get someone's attention, and within seconds, it was gone. I jumped up and ran out of my room, and as I turned the corner, I bumped right into my dad, who was coming down the hallway to my room. He said he heard me hit the wall, and he was coming to see what was going on. I explained everything to him, the best I could, and of course he ruled it off as a bad case of sleep paralysis. But I know for certain that this was not the case. I have had sleep paralysis many times before, and this experience was nothing like it. I was fully awake when the attack took place. I felt whatever it was that I came across probably came from that asylum the previous night and followed me home. I'm pretty sure it was just making me aware of its presence. I am a mail carrier here in California. A big part of my job is delivering Amazon packages, and as you can imagine, my workload has increased significantly during the pandemic. As per usual, this has increased the number of strange encounters I have had. I have a few to share, but I'll start with this one. My current route for the past 6 months leads me through multiple subdivisions of large, beautiful homes, like swimming pools with hot tubs in every yard. Given the pandemic, I've noticed people, mainly older folks, have really taken to coming outside to talk to me across their yards. I don't mind at all, but try to keep it short so I don't fall behind on my deliveries. One of my favorite residents is an older lady who I will call Mrs. Lithgow, for the sake of the story. She must be well into her 70s and loves to chat about everything going on in the neighborhood. It's not unusual for her to report back that so-and-so has left their lawn unattended for 2 months, or that they have strange visitors at odd hours. I usually just nod and smile. The house across the street from Mrs. Lithgow was only listed for sale for a few days when it was purchased quickly. Shortly thereafter, my truck began to fill up with Amazon packages for whoever lived there. Mrs. Lithgow noticed right away and told me a week later that the packages would stay in their pile until nighttime, and then have disappeared in the morning. This didn't seem strange to me at the time. Mrs. Lithgow became further concerned and began telling me that there always seemed to be a lot of screaming coming from the house later in the evening. I hadn't heard anything, but my deliveries were always earlier in the morning. My first strange encounter was dropping off a stack of packages. I had loaded my arms way higher than I was supposed to. I was in a rush and was waddling up the path. I felt my foot hit something hard and thought it might break. I set down the stack and to my horror I realized I had kicked a bag of garbage that had fallen open. Sticking out the top was a jar with what looked like animal body parts in it. They had leaked into the hot stone path, and as soon as I had stopped, the smell was unbearable. I noticed that there was also a creepy doll in the bag. I quickly finished my delivery and got out of there. I thought about calling the police, but honestly, I thought maybe it was just a fetal pig or something like that, so I talked myself out of it. Mrs. Lithgow approached me a few weeks later, telling me that she had finally met the homeowner. After the whole bottle incident, I was pretty interested to know who lived there. Mrs. Lithgow said it was a petite pink-haired woman who said she was living there with her autistic charge. Mrs. Lithgow thought it was so strange, and I couldn't help but agree that this young woman lived there alone with this other person, but no one ever seen them coming or going. I chalked it up to the pandemic and went on with my day. Mrs. Lithgow, though, however, did not. The next day, she came racing to the side of the road. I had to remind her to stay 6 feet away, but she was shouting that there had been an incident. Apparently the woman living in the house and the man she cared for had been spotted outside in the backyard. Kids were playing a few houses down and came running and yelling that the autistic man had threatened to shoot them with arrows and were yelling, "Do you know who I am?" I'll admit, I wanted to know more, but I didn't have the time to ask questions. Another time, she told me that pink smoke had billowed out of the house, and 2 people came running out screaming. After that, I didn't see Mrs. Lithgow, as she had left town to visit one of her kids. The house stayed quiet, and I continued to leave stacks and stacks of packages there. I began to notice, though, that the names on the packages were often different, lots of times just being Fat Goblin and other weird things. I once ran across into 2 electricians leaving the house. As I passed by them, one of them said, "That house is full of cat poop. Full." When my route was slightly altered, so their address was later in the day, I also started to hear the yelling that I think Mrs. Lithgow had been referring to. It was a grown man, and he was constantly yelling almost incoherent things like,
"Black. Mika's crying."
At first I thought he might have been yelling at me, but several times I noticed he was yelling before I even approached the house. I thought maybe it was linked to his diagnosis. Honestly, none of these occurrences were that weird to me, given some of the other experiences I've had and the context given. A few weeks ago, I had to deliver a package that required a signature. I had never actually seen anyone there myself, but I knocked anyway. I heard a small shriek and shuffling about. Concerned, I walked toward the side of the house, but still in front, and yelled, "Hello, I need a signature for a package." The shuffling continued. I went back to the front door to knock one last time and to leave a note letting them know where they could pick it up. I suddenly heard a loud, fast stomping from inside the house. I peeked into the glass of the door to see if someone was coming. It was a stocky man dressed in a spandex suit from head to toe. He waved a gun in the air. I stepped back in shock. I froze for a second, long enough to hear him yell,
"You're not safe here."
That was enough for me to get moving again. I turned and began to run. As I raced down the driveway and back into my truck, I could now fully see the man, holding his weapon, yelling,
"I shoot to maim."
I took off. I called my supervisor immediately, but was told there is nothing we can do about it, because technically, I was on their property, and he never directly threatened me. I still think I should have called the police, though. I began leaving the packages at the end of their driveway, and have not heard or seen anyone in that house again. A few years ago, I had to commute for my job from October 2018 to January of 2019. It was nothing special, a retail job, but I lived in a rural area in the California foothills, and it was my only option at the time. I would be driving home every night at around 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., depending on when I would get off from work. The highway was always deserted at these times, and some nights were more peculiar than others, but nothing so extreme as this story. It wasn't uncommon for me to see a lot of wildlife on these drives. I would just take it slow and be alert. Black-tailed deer, coyotes, raccoons, I was well accustomed to them at this point. One night, I was only about 10 minutes away from home. I rolled up to my usual four-way stop. I'd stopped at hundreds of times before. It was probably around 1 a.m., not a soul around, completely dead quiet. As I came to a complete stop, I saw something standing just off the side of the road, across from the intersection. It was obviously an animal, but it was headed towards the road, so I was going to wait for a second to see if it was going to cross. It took me a second to really comprehend what it was at first. I thought it was a horse, which, although dangerous, wouldn't be that uncommon for where I live due to their irresponsible ranchers and their constantly broken fences. Then, as I started to be able to make out more of its detail, as it neared the light from my headlights, I realized something was wrong about this animal. It was tall, so much so that the legs looked stilt-like. As I sat there, shocked, it slowly stepped into the road across from my car and into the direct beam of my headlights. At this point, I realized two things. One, it was taller than my car, and two, its gait was very odd, almost like it didn't know how to properly walk as a deer should. It was like its joints wanted to bend in the wrong way. It slowly moved into the oncoming lane and then swiveled its head to look at me. All the hair rose in my body. What spooked me the most was it was certainly a deer, or at least something that really looked like one. It looked normal in every way except the spider-like legs it was standing on. At this point, I gassed it, and the deer stood unmoving as my car sped past. I investigated my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of it crossing the oncoming lane back onto the shoulder of the highway, illuminated red by my brake lights. When I got home, I ran from my car to my house and locked myself in, still understandably freaked out. I never saw it again, and ever since I've been listening to this show, I've heard tons of other stories of people seeing these weird deer creatures in this exact area on this show. At this point, I've become desensitized to it. It wasn't until recently that I learned about the not deer creatures, and it makes me wonder, what is going on? I went on a little hiking trip with my dad to Mount Shasta, California, a small town in Northern California near the Oregon border. Shasta is home to potentially active volcano named, of course, Mount Shasta. There are many trails on Mount Shasta, so my father and I were excited to do some hiking. We drove up the side of the mountain to the parking lot in which one of the trails began. I believe it was called the Old Ski Bowl Trail. The landscape was a very barren incline, filled with rocks, boulders, dirt, and very few trees. About an hour into the trail, we came across a very odd assembly of these large boulders. They were arranged in a circle. We thought it was strange, but we continued. If you look up pictures of the trail, you'll see much smaller rocks arranged in patterns and circles. My father and I only encountered 3 people. At least, that's what they appeared to be at first. The first 2 were a father and son. We met them on a steep incline that went along the wall of the cliff, that when we would switch back, it would take you to the top of the cliff. We stopped and said hello, talked about the trail, and then went our separate ways. Here's where it gets weird. My dad and I started walking up the incline for about 2 minutes. I turned around and I saw the father and son were incredibly far down the trail, almost like they had teleported. It should have taken them at least 20 minutes to get down there from where they were, but somehow, in only about 2 minutes, they have gotten down way further than possible. To this day, I have absolutely no idea how that could have happened. There was no one else on that trail at that point, and I could see the color of their clothes from the distance, so I knew it was them. I pointed it out to my dad. We thought it was weird, but we didn't want to dwell on it, so we just kept on moving. And here's where it starts to get much weirder. As we reached the top of the cliff, there was another strange rock arrangement that was off to the side of the trail. This time, there were far more rocks than before, and they were now arranged in rows, almost like gravestones. We continued the trail and reached another sort of incline with a switchback to reach the top of another cliff. We reached a point where we would need climbing gear to continue, so we decided to head back. When we turned around, I saw a man standing among the rocks, staring at us intently. He was wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was at a distance where I should have been able to make out his facial features, but it was almost like he didn't have any, like his face was just flesh and skin. I pointed him out to my dad, and the man quickly ducked down behind a boulder and was peering out at us over the top of the boulder. It seemed almost playful, like a child trying to hide. For a few moments, I was almost out of it. I have no recollection of what was going on. According to my dad, I just started walking towards the man in the hat. My dad was calling to me, "Joshua, Josh, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And then I came to. I was standing right at the edge of the cliff. It was a huge drop, enough to kill me or seriously injure me. My dad grabbed me and pulled me back onto the trail. He told me to stay put. My dad went down to the boulders to search for the man, but he wasn't there. There was nowhere for him to go except down or up the trail. It didn't make any sense. He just simply disappeared. I have no idea what was going on that trail, and I have no explanation for it. I've told this many times to family and friends, and no one has an explanation. I've done my fair amount of research and found similar stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat. I've also read that Native American tribes from that area viewed Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believe it could act as a portal to other dimensions, and that it was guarded by spirits who would potentially harm anyone who tried to go up the volcano. If anybody has had any similar experiences or any insight at all, I would love to hear. I was around the age of 18 when this happened. This takes place in my hometown in rural Oregon. The town's name is Elkton. Not like that matters. You probably never heard of it. The town has a population of less than 1,000 people and consists of a restaurant, a bar, a store, a park, and a post office. All surrounded by scattered farmland. Nothing bad ever really happens there, and everyone knows each other. At this point of my life, I was lazy. I had no job, no car, still lived with my mom, and smoked a lot of weed. A certified loser. My routine was sleep in until I felt like waking up, get stoned, and play video games. Once I got bored with that, I'd walk over to my buddy's house and hang out for the rest of the night. I'd usually hang out there until around 1 a.m. For reference, I lived about 2 miles out of town, and my buddy lived in town. The walk wasn't bad though, and was probably the only exercise I was getting. I'd just pop in my headphones and zone out. This happened during one of those nights when I was walking back home. I was walking through town on the main road. I had my headphones in and was just vibing while I made the 2-mile trek. As I approached the park, I noticed a car sitting in the parking lot. It was a bit weird at first, because usually I would never see people on these walks home. The whole town was asleep during those hours. I shrugged it off as maybe someone passing through and taking a nap or something. Just off the road by the park is a trail that leads down to the river. At the start of the trail, there's a bench. As I approach the part of the road that passes by the trail, some random guy abruptly appears from the trailhead. I would say this guy looked to be in his early 40s, judging by how he dressed and his facial features. One thing was strange though. He had aviators on, at 1 a.m. He power walked in front of me and sat on the bench. The whole situation was striking me as weird. It looked like he was just staring at me the entire time, but it was really hard to tell for sure because of the dark glasses. I was a little freaked out at first and stupidly shrugged it off. I just started walking diagonally, so there would be some distance between us once I passed him.
So I pass him. I look at him, and he was still looking at me. So I took my earbuds out and kindly say, "How's it going?" I think that was a bad move. He didn't reply, of course. I just picked up the pace and focused on getting home. This guy gave me major chills, so I left one earbud out so I could hear and be aware of my surroundings. I just got about a quarter mile away down the road and decided to look back to see if he was still sitting there. He wasn't. He was now walking behind me, following me pretty heavily, and he was closing the distance. I swear my heart skipped a beat when I saw this. Could he really be following me? Maybe he lives up here too. But that had to be his car at the park, so why is he on foot? All these questions were flying through my head. I looked back and he was even closer and walking at a faster pace. Fight or flight kicked in, and I went from a casual stroll to a dead sprint instantly. I looked back once more, and he matched my pace and was now sprinting as well. For some reason, I decided to veer off the road and cut through the forest. I sprinted over broken branches and through brush for a bit until I eventually dove into a big bush. I instantly went silent. I could hear him stomping through the forest behind me. Then suddenly, he went quiet as well. I think he was trying to pinpoint where I was. This lasted a few minutes before I heard him start to go the other way back to the park. I felt so relieved that he gave up. I still waited there for a few more minutes until his footsteps faded away, and I was sure he was out of the forest. Then I cut back through the road as quietly as I could. Once I hit the pavement, I checked both ways to make sure he wasn't there. There was no sign of him anywhere, but honestly, I could only see for probably 40 feet in either direction, because I was no longer in the main part of town and there were no street lamps. I was still relieved because I thought for sure I had lost him, so I just focused on getting home. I was only about a mile away or so at this point. Eventually, I put my headphones back in and started to relax as much as I could, not even fully cluing in on what just happened. A few minutes passed and I started to notice a light coming up behind me. Headlights from a vehicle. My stomach sank as I was praying that it wasn't him. He must have gone back to get his car, I thought. As it approached me, it slowed down. I cringed as it pulled up next to me and came to a stop. I looked expecting to see that guy wielding a weapon and demanding that I get in the car. Thankfully, it wasn't him. It was a local guy around my age, Brent, on his way home from a get-together. What's up, dude?" I spoke. "Hey, man, do you need a ride home?" he asked. Stupidly, I replied, "Nah, dude, it's all good. I'm almost home. Thanks, though." I could see a worried expression on his face as he cut me off. "Are you sure? You know there's someone following you, right?" I immediately looked down the road behind me, and there he was. The same guy. He was closer than ever before, and I somehow never noticed him. I could see something in his hands reflecting from Brent's taillights. I never lost him. He was following me the entire time. I was completely oblivious. I looked back at Brent and didn't say anything and scrambled in the truck. I didn't say anything during the ride. All I was thinking about how stupid I was. We pulled into my driveway, and I was never happier to see my house. As I was getting out of the truck, Brent jokingly said, "I probably just saved you from being murdered." He couldn't have been closer to the truth, honestly. The older I get, the scarier this experience becomes. What were his intentions? What was he going to do? Kill me? Abduct me? Why was he in Elkton, Oregon, of all places? I'm glad I never found out. I stopped staying at my buddy's house so late after this experience, and always kept one earbud out so I could be aware of my surroundings. No matter how much you think you know an area, or how safe you think it is, you should always be prepared for anything. There are truly evil and insane people in this world. Stay safe out there, everyone. The events of this story took place around the autumn months of 2014. I'm not sure what would have happened if my mom hadn't heard this person, but either way, I'm grateful she did. To help paint a better picture of the events I'm about to describe to you, I must first briefly explain the basic layout of my home. There are 3 entrances to my home: the front, side, and the back door, which was in what was my bedroom at the time. The back door has a glass window that allows a perfect view of a 1/4 acre of our backyard. This might not seem like much, but living in Salem, Oregon, that's as good as you're gonna get. To access the backyard, you must first walk down the driveway on the left side of the house, leaving you visible to the next door neighbors. This is also where our brittle side door from the 1940s lie. At the end of the driveway is our garage, and to the right of that, our backyard, as unfortunately, there was no gate at the time, but this incident and several others like it led us up to putting one up, and we also put up a roughly 7-foot tall fence. Now that you know the basic layout of my home, you're probably noticing the potential for something sinister to happen. And happen it did, my friends. But one thing for certain is it could have gone a lot worse. This incident took place in the early hours of 2 or 3 a.m. As I've always been a hardcore insomniac, I'd probably be the president if there was a club. Anyways, I was watching YouTube on my tablet as most 13-year-olds do, when I'm startled by a beam of light illuminating the garage doors in my periphery. Before I even turned my head to look, I had already come to the following conclusions. 1. The familiar circle beam of light was a flashlight, and 2. I had a Henry .22 caliber survival rifle under my bed that I used for target practice just in case. Thank God my family's a gun family. I decided to wait to see who it was, and to see where this light was coming from, as it wasn't uncommon for our neighbor to come into our yard looking for his cat. It's a good thing I did too, because the flashlight was attached to the business end of a 9mm handgun held by a uniformed police officer complete with a ballistics vest, taser, baton, and radio. Confused, I leave my bedroom expecting to see my mom sitting on the couch watching her favorite TV show, Bones. Instead, I saw my mother on the tips of her toes leaning over the kitchen sink, looking out the window, and peering, trying to see a view of the officer, slowly and methodically creeping his way up the driveway and up to our garage. Yep, he's definitely here for us, I thought as I began to ask my mom what was going on. Apparently less than 15 feet away from my bed, a homeless person high on who knows what had snuck into our backyard and accidentally kicked our glass recycling bin, alerting my mom, who was in the basement doing laundry. My mom tells me she then looked out the basement window, and she saw this person making some kind of stance, one would be to try to balance on a board. It was strange, almost like the stance a child would do when they're out of bed at late hours of the night trying to be sneaky to fetch a snack. Regardless of their feeble attempts at being stealthy, my mom had seen them, and they must have caught on to it, because by the time my mom went upstairs to retrieve her phone and dial 911, and an officer finally arrived, they were all gone. The cop told us that no one was in our garage or the backyard, and I could almost feel the anxiety lift off my mother's shoulders. Even more so when the officer offered to send someone over to survey the house until sunrise. So just to clarify, and to kind of make you understand why we ended up getting security cameras and a fence in the backyard and a motion detector light, was that this guy easily got into our yard, could have easily broken into our house, and done who knows what to our family. I'm just glad it didn't come down to that. I'll start off by saying that this is not my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have since asked each of my friends through the years to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I first heard about this dog or a wolf. I have since asked each friend, over the years miles apart, and they all remember the same exact encounter, almost down to the exact detail. Before my ex James was even my boyfriend, he and our friends were about 17 to 18 years old. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's hike to insert spot here and go puff. The group was consisted of James, his best friend Brad, and their girlfriends Shannon and Mel. The four of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, to be honest, but it's nature in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly what trail they were on. The main one that connects the parking lot to the river. They had driven in Brad's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and then walked across the river. On the way to the river from the lot, there's a small bridge that crosses a small creek. This will be relevant for later. The group spent the day out there swimming and puffing and swimming. Just being typical Oregonian teens. I can imagine that hunger is what drove them to go home after a couple of hours. As the sun began to set, either activity alone is bound to get some people hungry, let alone both. So, they walked along the well-worn main dirt path to the parking lot, This path has since been paved according to Google Maps. It does not take more than about 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot that they had crossed when they hiked in. When they reached the small footbridge near the parking lot, Brad looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain and noticed a huge dog near the tree line, probably 100 yards or so away. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary per se, just looking absolutely humongous. But from Mel's and James's descriptions and the drawings she did for me later in around 2005, it was very shaggy and furry looking. I may even still have that notebook where she drew the dog thing in. If I find it, I will send it into the show. My friends continued to walk across this small wooden bridge, and one of the girls screamed. The big dog was now on its hind legs, walking like a person, standing much closer than when they had last seen it, a couple of seconds earlier. It had somehow traversed most of the large field in the seconds it took for them to get across the 10-foot-long bridge. Whatever this thing was, it was quiet, fast, and stealthy. My 4 friends ran to the car, and they had the classic cliche, "I can't get the key in" moment, because Brad was fumbling madly for the keys out of anxiety. At this point, the dog was standing on its hind legs at the very edge of the parking lot looking at them. Still, it had this dog face and this dog-like body, but it was standing up. It just seemed so unnatural. They never saw it walking on all 4 or just 2. It just seemed to teleport and move closer and closer. It was like every time they looked up, it was just standing there, but closer. As James had said, every time they looked up, he was closer but not moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs with no effort. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way they described it. Many times I had asked them, "Are you sure it was not a bear?" And every single time they would say no. It was a dog standing on its hind legs, a big dog that was stalking them. This happened in Lane County, Oregon, sometime around the year 2000. There are few if any bears out there. It would be odd, but then again I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving the Pizcaw dog to his own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, Shannon doesn't even like talking about the incident at all because it's creepy for her and gives her anxiety. I'm a 15-year-old girl living in Oregon, and on the 9th, it was my birthday and I wanted some friends to come over. So I brought my friends Ella and Jade to have a sleepover. We did the normal teen activities, but once it hit 2 a.m., we got bored and decided to sneak out and walk to Walmart. To give you information about my property, we only have 15 acres, and to get to Walmart it's about 3 miles from my house. So we put warm clothes on, grabbed our wallets, and took the screen out of my window and went to Walmart. After roughly 30 minutes of walking, we heard a car behind us, and we got to the side so it could drive past us. But no, the car stopped and a man was in it. He asked, "Hey girls, you need a ride?" "No, we're fine, thanks though," Ella said. The guy kept trying to get us into his beat-up pickup truck, but we kept saying no and eventually he drove off. That was weird, I said, looking at my friends who were kind of scared. "I think we should just go back," Jade said, trembling. Not just from the cold, but also that guy looked like a serial killer in a horror movie. I thought about it, but I'm too stubborn and just went ahead. Eventually, we reached Walmart and bought a bunch of junk food and drinks. We were walking back and talking about our crushes and gossiping when we heard another car behind us. And then we saw it was the same green pickup truck, but behind it was another truck as well. All of us freaked out and dropped everything we had and ran as fast as we could. But when you're running from a truck you don't know, you're not going to win because both trucks stopped us with 5 grown men in them. They all jumped out and then circled us. The 3 of us huddled together, and I was about to ask what they want when the first guy stopped us and pulled out a gun. We started sobbing in each other's arms, and the men started closing in on us with their arms outreached and smiles on their faces. We thought we were going to die or be sold into some sort of trade, but just in time a police officer pulled up when the guys were distracted. We ran to the car. "What's going on?" the cops said, eyeing the men. They said nothing, jumped in their trucks, and drove off. We got in the car and told the officer the entire story as he drove us home. He said he wouldn't say anything to my parents because we snuck out, but he said if trouble ever happened, call the cops again and ask for Officer Addington. So we went home and slept till 12:30. My parents still don't know, and it's going to stay like that until I'm much older. I know the story may not be the scariest, but it was one of the scariest things to ever happen to me, and I wanted to share it. So this story takes place a few years ago, while I was walking home from high school. I didn't normally walk home, but I didn't have a ride home from the game club that day, so I had no choice. It's about a 45-minute walk from the school to my house, and I really wish that I wasn't doing it and did not look forward to it. Game club got out at about 6, and it was winter, and snow was still on the ground. It was also quite dark, and I hate the dark. Anyways, I just walked past the Safeway, then past the Goodwill donation center, when this homeless guy started walking behind me with his shopping cart. I felt anxious, but I've always been paranoid, so that's nothing new. He got faster and ended up walking next to me for a while, then turned his head to look at me. "Don't worry, I'm not following you," he spoke. This freaked me out a bit, but I just simply replied with a short, "Okay." I'm an awkward person, so I wasn't sure how to respond. I also thought he was my dad's friend at the time, because he looked a lot like him, but it was also dark, so I couldn't completely see him. He then said, "People usually think that I'm following them." I think I just stayed silent, and didn't respond. After a few minutes of us walking, he asked, "So where are you headed?" I told him, "Home," still thinking this is my dad's friend, and he asked, "Where's that?" Alarms went off in my head, and I was scared at this point, but also confused. Being the idiot I was, I answered his question by telling him the street, not the address, thankfully. I should have lied, though. He then went on by saying, "Oh, that's a long way from here." I don't remember if I said anything in return, but it was obvious that he was indeed following me. The next thing I remember is that we were walking by Circle K, when he then offered me $1 to buy a soda. I didn't want to take it, but ended up accepting it anyways and told him thanks. I felt bad about it, but he seemed like he wouldn't accept no as an answer. We went across the street to Circle K, but I honestly regret not running away as soon as he started crossing. Once we got to the store, he told me he would be waiting for me. He wouldn't go in because the person working there didn't like him. That terrified me. I know I should have told the worker I was being followed and got some sort of help, but I just did not think about this at the time. I ended up getting a slushie, blue raspberry, my favorite. I walked out of the store and there he was, still there like he said he would be. We continued the walk and I had no clue what to do. I had never been in a situation like this. We were getting close to a part of the road that went over a river and a bunch of trees around it. He randomly asked, "Do you want to put your bag in my cart?" I shockingly replied, "No thanks, I'm fine." He then tried to tell me that he was just trying to help and tried to convince me, saying, "Are you sure? I don't mind." I then nervously thanked him but assured him that I was fine. Even if he was trying to help, I didn't want to risk getting my stuff stolen. Plus, the vibe I was getting from him was super creepy. I don't think I had any weapons on me at the time, but I wish I did, just in case. We were now on the road that was over the river when he says, "I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back." I stood in shock for a moment as I watched him and his cart disappear, then I slowly walked forward a bit and stepped on some snow, just to hear that satisfying crunching sound. I don't know if this is odd, but I enjoy stepping on things like snow, ice, and leaves. But anyways, I asked myself if this was my chance, and if I should just leave. The answer is obvious, I know. I started to walk away when I saw a car pull up into the building closest to me, and they got out of their car and called for me. Thank goodness it was an acquaintance of mine. I ran over, and they offered me a ride home, and of course I accepted. They were just driving home from one of their clubs that just got out. Thankfully, I jumped in. The homeless guy walked past me and saw me, and yelled something about me getting in, and if I knew them or something like that. Either way, I'm so thankful Evan was there to help me out. I don't know what would have happened if he didn't pass by that night, or if he didn't see me walking. I saw the homeless guy again later, but he was at Circle K and thankfully didn't notice me walk by. I live in a new house now, but I still live in that same town of Sweet Home, Oregon. I have never had another experience with that man, and I hope I never do again.
The year was 2006, sometime in mid-August. We had been renting this double-wide trailer on 6 acres of land for about 3 years now. The first year nothing strange really happened at all, unless you asked my mother. We've always been low income, so we were constantly moving, year after year, ever since I was knee-high. So we thought we hit the jackpot when it came time to finding this new and very affordable place. We've had enough of the landlord from our last place. This new place was cheap enough for just some reason. I'm from Tacoma, Washington, and this new place was just too good to be true. Lots of land, it had a barn, a detract garage, and lots of land. Oddly enough, the middle school I would be attending the following year after moving in was literally just across the road, Cougar Mountain Junior High. The school district even eventually offered this landlord millions of dollars for his land, and he cautiously declined. At first, it really wasn't so bad. Really, the last residents did a real number on the place though, however. Right off the bat, there was a large section of the wall cut out from the detached garage. A coffee can-sized hole that went straight through the floor by the fireplace. A large pile of trash out back by the burn pit. A very leaky ceiling and, most alarming, candle wax melted into the carpet of the house and garage, which we finally figured out years later why. There was also lots of trash stuffed into the chicken coops. The trash remained there long enough for officials to stop and take pictures. Then the landlord finally removed it. Even after all of that happened, I don't wish to say scumlord, because this landlord obviously did enough and had enough on his plate. He was always around and active. I don't know, I just don't want to blame him, I guess. Although, there were things he just wouldn't mention to us, or anyone to that matter, and you can obviously tell he was very cautious about something. You can see he was obviously sweating something about our property. He only lived right across the ranch out back, and a kitty corner from us. Anyway, it's been so long now, I can't quite remember when the paranormal stuff started. It was like things were gradually getting weirder and weirder up until the end. We had a rather big family. I think what was affected first by us was our behavior. Over time, it was like our family's darkest days were unfolding. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. So much more happened than I'd really like to explain, and I can't cover it all without writing a book about it. We've had many dogs. I think things started really getting strange when they would bring back odd bones and things from the yard that we couldn't identify or justify. My mom emphasized that there were probably paranormal things happening because of some sort of burial ground or something. One time they dug up what looked like a monkey skull. Me being a rebellious 13-year-old put it on the fence post by the main gate to look metal for my middle schooler friends. Everyone at school pretty much knew I lived across the street. We had one dog that would always get loose and come to school, and I was the one that had to chase him around the cafeteria and bring him back home. It would literally be mentioned over the intercom, "My name here, would you please come retrieve the dog?" This happened several times. I wouldn't say I was the most popular student, or even infamously popular student or anything like that. I admit then I was strange to mess with, and I blame it on the things that went on at home. For the longest time, this was my whole life, and it still haunts me to this very day. I'm 27 now, and I literally just had a dream about that property last night about the strange things that happened there. My whole family was affected, and I'm the only one who has the guts to talk about it. Me and my mom anyway. I've never reported what I've seen. Also, over the years, I've tended to tell less and less. People just think I'm crazy, but I know now seeing is believing. That's the moral of the story here. If only people saw it for themselves. Everybody's so scared and everybody dismisses it for the sake of their own mentality. This whole property was creepy. We left all my friends when we left the trailer park. So I'd spend most of my time exploring the land here with my dogs. For no reason at all, I'd say the barn was probably the spookiest. All my family agrees even to this day, but nothing ever really happened there. I guess it was just the vibe. Out of all of this property, there was just one black Angus cow. Again, nothing ever happened. Most I did was feed the old cow apples. The barn was locked off from the cow. She'd just roamed the land, so the barn was always silent and void of activity, except massive beehives, making it even more creepy. Everyone in the household worked, so I was by myself 30% of the time. My mom says after she saw a dark, very tall figure running across the fence line outside at night, after the first year, things started to get really creepy. Maybe so from her perspective. I think things started getting weird when I couldn't sleep. For the first time in my life, I started waking up with sleep paralysis. I'd fight it and regain my freedom of movement in fear of falling back asleep. Freaked out, I'd call the one person I knew I could always count on picking up the phone, my grandma. She'd tell me to go back to sleep and even come stay with us sometimes. One night when activity was picking up, I was playing in the family room, playing my Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic game on my Xbox, when suddenly, a booming sound came from what sounded like something going over the house. I'm too engrossed with my game to really care, so I dismiss it as maybe some sort of plane flying over, even though you could only hear them from our old house. 10 minutes later, my big brother and his girlfriend came out of their bedroom whispering and visibly spooked. They asked me what that noise was. They thought it was someone with a shotgun like 10 feet away from the house. Honestly, who knows? It was loud, and really thinking about it, I guess I got scared myself, because I didn't really recognize the sound, but I couldn't really find a reason why it would be alarming. One day, I woke up and my whole family was gathered out back staring at the doggy door. This mobile home was from the 1960s and the doggy door was thick plastic. We lived here approximately a year and a half now. My oldest brother is tough as nails. We all looked down at the doggy door and it's got a checkmark shape cut on it. I remember everyone baffled as to what exactly happened. We were all so confused. My oldest brother comes out with a sharp knife and tries to cut the rest of the doggy door. He's the strongest out of the family, and he's even having trouble sawing through the plastic. I'm a painter nowadays, and I can honestly say a box cutter would have trouble going through thick 60s plastic. But there was this clean cut, almost immaculate. This is strange, but we let that go. Later, my sister's boyfriend moves in with us. He's up every morning exercising in the garage. One day, to this day, he says something was knocking in that garage. So he moved to another spot. The garage floor was 2/3 concrete and the remainder was an elevated 2-step flooring of carpet. My sister's boyfriend was just doing push-ups when he heard a knocking from under him. First time he stops and switched places. Second time he stopped and moved to another spot. The third time, the knock was so violent, he stopped altogether. Much later, my sister and cousin were hanging out. There was this non-running car in the center of our garage the whole time we lived there, a black Mitsubishi Eclipse. It was in the very center, and on top of it was a classic red wagon that in the 2 years that I lived there, I never saw it move. A little less irrelevant, right above the wagon was an opening to the attic of the garage. Anyway, one day, out of nowhere, right in front of my sister and my cousin, the wagon on top of the car slammed to the floor and spooked them so bad that they ran out of there, like bats out of hell. Honestly, it was weird, and nobody could figure out what sent that cart flying. It was stationary that entire time, and suddenly, it just fell. If you asked me, the garage never really gave off much of a bad vibe, but, everybody has different experiences at this place. Although one night I'm hanging out with one of my older brothers and I can see the dog is chasing something. The dogs have been known to chase the cow off and on. It's dark outside and whatever the dogs are chasing, I know it's not the cow. This thing was tall. I point out, hey, what's that? My big brother is with me, and he didn't even acknowledge. It's dark, so who really knows? Maybe it's the cow, maybe there was something flying over it, and that's what I saw, I don't know. Around this time, my grades started dropping. I was sleeping more in class than at home. I was picturing things that were just very odd in my mind. I'd freak out and bolt out of class. Sometimes I'd just go straight home. Other times I'd attempt to go back to class, where I would continue sleeping during the day. For a long, solid moment there, it seemed like all of my summer of 2006, I just had these weird, vicious-looking werewolf creatures popping into my mind any time I would close my eyes. It would just be standing there at our glass door, looking back at me, panting, as if it had malicious intent. It would never actually enter the house. It would just stand there looking back at me, looking like something out of the underworld movies. Honestly, that is all I can say was on my mind. I would like to say it was just in my imagination, but it's hard to say these days. One day my brother also had the exact same dream and vision that I was having. He said that he saw this dogman thing crouching in the hallway waiting for someone to pounce on. At this time I got the bedroom across from him, so it had been in between his bedroom and mine that we had seen something truly strange in the shadows. These dreams were seemingly becoming real. We would see these werewolves and these outlines of werewolves in our dreams, but in that hallway between our rooms, we both swear out of the corner of our eye, we would see the silhouette of something that looked like a werewolf. The landlord was honestly probably trying to hide something. I don't know. I know that there were kids that I've heard rumors from that said strange things happened on that land. I could find a little bit of history on it in public records, but nothing crazy. Honestly, I've heard of a lot of Bigfoot sightings and other things like that here as well. I've even found some things that look like Bigfoot footprints. I would love to know if anybody has any idea if this land is potentially haunted, or if all of these happenings on this land are just strange occurrences or coincidences. I'm sorry if this story was a little boring and a little jumbled, but thank you for sharing it if you do. I moved to Kent, Washington from Phoenix, Arizona in August due to a fire. I bought a car online and flew into Seattle to pick up my SUV. My boyfriend and I got into an argument, so I left my car in a parking lot in Kent, Washington and took my keys. I got hungry, so I ordered Chinese food. I wanted to go pick up my Chinese food in the plaza across from where my car was, and ended up in the wrong plaza. I walked into the wrong business and sat down at a booth waiting for my food. Like an idiot, I'm still waiting, and the lights go off and I'm still sitting there. Now what I heard is something I will never, ever hear again in my life, and I'm still losing sleep over this. I know what I saw and I know what I heard, and no one listening to me ever believes me, not even the police officer I reported this to. I swear I could hear from the back what sounded like people being tortured. A child screaming. From below the booth and above this restaurant. This wrong restaurant that I was in. I slowly got up quietly, as there was a light on in the kitchen. I walked over to the door to see if it was still unlocked, and it was. I banged on the kitchen window and told them I'll be back tomorrow with the police, as I know what the hell is going on here. I slowly back up to the door as I know it's unlocked, and this guy is following me out to the door, and he's on his phone. By the time I get to the middle of the parking lot, I'm surrounded by all kinds of people. They're wearing what looks like hoods and dark clothing. I go as fast as I can and haul past them into a homeless camp in the woods. I know where to go and saw them pass me. There were 9 men in total chasing me. Now they know I know what's going on. At least, I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm pretty sure there's some sort of human trafficking thing, and I probably found their location. I brought the cops back the next day and I was charged for trespassing and permanently banned from the property, in which I guess I don't really mind. I had to tell somebody, and the next day I did, and I did not know somebody was listening to me at the same time. A man from India overheard my conversation and asked if he could talk to me in private, in which I told him we could. He told me what I heard is exactly what I heard, and that I am to keep my mouth shut. They looked at me with a face of fear. They told me that I was in danger, so I fled to Oregon. I stopped at a truck stop to use the bathroom, and on the bathroom stall wall was an 1866 number for human trafficking, and I called it immediately crying because I was horrified of what I had heard, and I know what I heard, and so did this Indian man. I lay low right now, and I'm trying to stay low-key, and I did contact the human trafficking hotline. They told me the FBI will be in contact within a few weeks. They will be watching the place very closely. They ended up finding it, and they even have a website. This is going down in Kent, Washington, like I said. From outside, it looks like a professional business, a banquet hall, a restaurant, an Indian marketplace, and whatever else it could be. It's what people can't see underneath the place, and coincidentally, their business is down the street from the police station. Who's to say the police are not involved? I'm disgusted, and I know what's going on. I'm absolutely positive it is. Thank you for listening to my story, and sharing it if you do. I think more people need to know about this in the area. So I've sent you a few of my stories in the past, but I decided to send this one because I recently told it to one of my friends, and his reaction surprised me. He seemed genuinely unnerved, but I hadn't considered this story anything too odd. I figured I'd share this on the show, as now looking back I can't honestly figure out an explanation for what we saw. Some context is needed here. My grandparents live in Washington, in a small town near Mount Rainier. Their house is one of the relatively few up on the forested hill, and their backyard leads up to a big pasture. Beyond this is the woods, and a good chunk of it is their property. My grandfather is a hunter, and so he has this old tree stand, a wooden platform high up in between two trees, that my little sister and I converted into a sort of playhouse. We would spend hours out there in those woods, and I know them like the back of my hand. I've seen some odd stuff out there, but this seems by far the weirdest. This happened about 2 to 3 years ago in the summer. I can't remember a specific time for the life of me. My sister and I had been out by the tree stand, and it had been a gorgeous sunny day, not a cloud in sight. Though it was starting to get dark, the light shining through the leaves is a beautiful sight that I will never forget. These woods are truly beautiful and awe-inspiring. I love spending time in them. We would wander off a very short distance away from the stand, though it was not out of our line of sight. We had found a small fallen tree with an unnatural ditch under it. Being the kids we were, my sister and I went under the log and pretended to be soldiers hiding in a trench. It was then I noticed it. Straight ahead there was a clearing, clearly in my view. In it, someone had taken branches and set them up so they formed a circle standing upright in the clearing. This looked deliberate, as it was perfectly balanced. My sister and I thought this was so cool, so we ran into the ditch and went right up to it. Here's where things suddenly get weird. As I mentioned earlier, my grandfather is a hunter, so I know what sort of things were active in the woods and when. He would always refer to the twilight as the magic hour when the forest would come alive and all the animals would start moving. He also warned us that if the woods ever got silent, as in true complete silence, we were to go home immediately, as the silence meant a predator was near, and he has seen bears, wolves, and bobcats in the area. I bring this up because as my sister and I approached the circle, the woods fell dead silent. We could hear absolutely nothing outside of our breathing and our soft footsteps on the ground. There were no birds, no squirrels, no bugs, absolutely nothing. We inspected this scene very closely, but it didn't seem to be anything more than just a standing circle of twigs, and although it was odd, we weren't too scared. I noticed it was getting darker, and so we decided it was best to start going home. Nothing weird happened, at least not that I can think of. The sound returned as soon as we could no longer see the circle, and we made it back to our grandparents' house without incident. The next day we went back to see it, and it was completely gone, as if somebody had come and completely taken it apart. It was very weird. Looking back, the thought that someone came onto our private property just to make a circle of trees and then take it apart unnerves me. Who would do that? And what is the purpose? Was it for art, or was it intended to be scary? I honestly will never know, and I don't like that thought too much. I know this story might sound mundane, but after thinking about it for a while, it is actually incredibly unnerving. I live with my family here in Spokane, Washington. One Friday after school, my dad picks me up and my little brother up and tells me we must head over to Sprague Walmart to pick up a few odds and ends for the following week. I was excited just to get home so I could start my weekend already, but I didn't mind going over to Walmart with him, since I figured I could puppy dog eyes him into buying me a few extra sweet treats for me to enjoy. That and the alternative was to walk home, and since it looked like it was going to rain, I'd know I had chosen the better option. So we wandered around Walmart for a little while, talking about how school is going and what our family plans for the weekend are. I get my dad to agree to drive me over to a friend's house the next morning in exchange for a promise that I'll get all my homework done that evening. A small price to pay, since there's no way I'll be able to get over there on my own, since she lives on the other side of town. So we get checked out, we wheel the stuff out to the car and load it up into the trunk, and then we get ready to leave. But while we are driving out of the parking lot, a woman just sort of appears out of nowhere and stands in front of my father's car. She's wearing a red and black snapback with red hair falling out from under it and a t-shirt that says love on it with the O styled as a heart. Her clothes aren't dirty or anything, but she looks seriously methed out. What few teeth were still in her mouth were all yellow and rotten, and her eyes were just faded, like there was nothing behind them, no thought or reason whatsoever. Then she just starts saying, "This is my car," pointing down at the hood like, "How did you get my car?" At first my dad is polite with her, and I can tell he's in no mood for messing around. He's all like, "Nah, lady, this isn't your car. And you must be mistaken, but please move out of the street. Thank you." And I can tell from the tone in his voice that he's about to get mad with this lady real fast. But she will not move. She just stands there blocking our car and saying that this is her vehicle, repeatedly. That's when my dad turns to me in the back seat and asks if my phone has battery. I tell him yes, and he tells me to start recording what's happening in case we need evidence to show the cops. My dad gives the lady one last chance to get out of the way, and then he loses his temper completely and starts barking, saying something like, "Get your ass out of the way." The meth head in front of us, this lady, starts freaking out. She starts saying stuff like, "I just want to talk. I don't want violence, but I need to know how you got my car." My dad starts screaming at her again to get the hell out of the way, and eventually she does, and we drive along thinking the whole thing is over, and it was just some crazy, drugged-out meth head with delusions. But the situation, sadly, does not end there. We got to a set of traffic lights further down the road, and someone else then steps in front of the car. This time it's a guy wearing a dark jacket with short hair and a mustache. Honestly, each of these scumbags looked like they could have been paid extras on Breaking Bad, and he's putting on a similar act to the methed up lady before, who managed to catch up to us by that point. He's all like, "Can you get out? This is my car." And that's about the time I realized that this was a straight up attempt to carjack us. He wasn't like, "Hey, this is my friend's car," or anything like that. It was obvious that they were trying to steal it. They thought that they could coerce some naive stranger out of their car. How dumb is that? The guy in front then puts his hands on the inside of his jacket, like he's about to pull out a gun or something, but still he remains all calm, like, "Just talk to me, dude, this is my car, how did you get my car?" My dad turns around to my little brother Max and tells him to call 911. Max is shaking like a leaf, but he does as he's told, getting his phone out and dialing 911. My dad is still telling this guy to get out of the way and to leave us alone. It's not just me and my brother that are scared. I can hear it in my dad's voice, and that really got to me. My dad is tough. Like, to me, he's the strongest man in the world, and up until that point I had never heard his voice go like that. It's something that I don't think I'll ever forget. So as soon as Max has the 911 dispatcher on the line, my dad takes the phone off him and starts explaining the situation to the person on the other end. As he's doing this, some guy with a beard, sunglasses, and a blue hoodie then starts walking over to the driver's side. My dad tells Max to lock his door, but because he's on the phone, he's slightly panicked by this point, he forgets to lock his own. So this blue guy managed to open my dad's door, all calm, and asked, "What are you doing? This is her car," while he points over to the methed out lady. My dad then replies all polite that this is not her car, and then tries to shut the door again. The guy flips out, trying and failing to pry the door open again before my dad shuts it, screaming, "Get out of here! Get out of my car!" while kicking the driver's side door. If they would have just came up and tried to carjack us, that would have been bad enough. But the mind games they were trying to play with us, that was just downright scary. Like they expected us to be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this wasn't my car," and just give it to them. God, thinking about it makes me so angry. But at the time, all I could do was burst into tears as I filmed the whole thing. Right then, some other meth head appears at the passenger side where Max is sitting and starts banging on the side of the door. My dad starts trying to drive around the gang that was now surrounding us, and the dark jacket guy then jumps on the hood of the car while the other starts smashing a bicycle into the passenger door. My dad then seizes the opportunity and drives off down the avenue, with one of the meth heads still laying on the hood. He's driving slowly, talking to the 911 dispatcher the entire time, careful not to drive too fast in case the guy on the hood falls off and accidentally runs him over. But the next thing I know, there's this big roar of an engine that sounds to our right, I believe. And the guy in the blue hoodie is on some sort of motorcycle revving the engine and preparing to give chase. He's pulling up alongside us every so often to shout, slow down, let the guy off." And Dad realizes he's talking about the guy lying on the hood. My dad slows down for like 2 seconds, and the guy in the hood, who has obviously realized what a stupid situation he's gotten himself into, rolls off the hood and runs over to the sidewalk to escape what could have amounted to serious life-changing injuries. Not that he didn't deserve it. It just didn't really need to happen, honestly. We'd rather see them in jail or something, not dead. After that, the biker guy stopped following us, and we got home safe without anyone getting hurt. I was still crying as we pulled up outside our house, and even Max was really shaken up, when he's normally so cool and nonchalant about everything. But I wasn't crying out of fear anymore. It was just pure relief and gratitude that my dad handled the situation so well and kept all of us safe. We all hugged it out when we got inside, and my mom panicked, wanting to know everything. I'll always remember how my dad was like, "I'm your father, and I will always protect you when I can." I don't think I ever loved him as much as I did in that moment. I don't really want to go into detail about the interactions we had with the cops afterward. They insisted it was all just a misunderstanding, but anyone who was there would know it was so much more than that. Much more sinister. Those meth heads were trying anything they could to slow us down and get us out of our car. And I know using that term might give off the bad taste to people about addiction and such, but this is not meant to be harmful or offensive to anybody going through addiction. These people were clearly on some sort of drugs, and were trying to do something very sinister in an attempt to probably get more drugs, and that is why I called them such.